concepting, coming up with ideas and prototypes is easy. What's hard is polishing it into something beautiful, that's fun, that's engaging, that people want to play, that people want to share, that people want to talk about. That is the real hard part.
As an indie developer, how do we know if our game idea is something worth pursuing? Should we follow our passion or focus on what players want? And what are the biggest mistakes new devs make when choosing a project? In this episode, we're diving into what makes a good game idea, why validation matters more than our personal attachments. We also talk about some common misconceptions in game design, some sneaky marketing tactics that some developers are using, and why simplicity can often beat complexity. My name is Spencer Koroll, and joining me on today's episode is again James Smith, the co-producer of this podcast and also co-owner of Blackcap Creative, a 3D animation and game development studio. James has spent years in the indie game space, working through the highs and lows of indie game development, something that all indie creators can relate to. So, welcome to Indie Innovators, your backstage pass to the ever-evolving universe of indie game development. Think of this podcast as sitting down for coffee with the minds behind the games you can't stop playing, hearing firsthand about the late-night breakthroughs, the almost gave-up moments, and those bursts of inspiration that came when least expected. But we're not just here to share the success stories, we're also here to get real, discussing the challenges, the setbacks, the back-to-the-drawing-board scenarios, and extracting the gems of wisdoms that lie within each of these stories. So together, let's dive into the raw, unfiltered world of indie game development.
I mean, you know, on the Blackcap side, we've done like 8 prototypes this year, just tinkering, testing stuff, figuring out what works. And last year we did I was working on the prototype for the Trader's March. Often it's just whatever sticks. So you can build a game. Nobody wants to play it. Nobody's excited. Nobody gets interested. Then it's probably a dud. Move on.
What are some mistakes that you or others have made while picking an idea?
Getting too attached is probably the most common first mistake, right? Like you start working on a game and you're like, hey, like this is the first time I've figured out how to appropriately, cast or reference an object in this particular game engine. This is great. I've never had this length of development go right. I'm going to stick with this project. And it could still be a bad project, but you just become personally attached to it. So you just keep working on it. And it's like, similar to my last response, it might not be good. It might be bad, but it's just like you have a personal attachment to it. So you just keep working on it. And then eventually it fizzles out and you're like, man, I wasted like a year or I wasted 6 months. I think that's definitely the most common mistake, especially in the indie space. The other one would be not testing ideas. So like in the producing space, everything is about validation. It's about making sure that did we test the idea? Did we like this idea? Did we talk to like 10 people and are they all excited? Are they all asking me questions about the idea? Because if they're not, I shouldn't pursue this idea. Even if it sounds really exciting, like there has to be some kind of interest.
Just to clarify with this, you're talking about not just like testing it amongst the people that are working on it. You're talking about testing it with like potential people that might be interested in actually playing the game.
Even friends, people people in networking groups, right? Just being like, hey, it'd be cool if there was a game that, was called One Bench Man, and all it was a simple mobile casual game where you just like swipe down and swipe up slowly to match the rhythm. It's a rhythm game, and just talk about it. And people are like, that's interesting, or like, oh, how would that work? And if there's engagement with conversation about that idea, then it's something worth tinkering with. But if you talk to like 5 people and all of them are like, don't do it. All right, don't do it. Or go talk to somebody else, right? Figure out who that demographic is. You can test with an elevator pitch. You don't even need concept art.
What about misconceptions that new indie devs have about choosing a game concept?
I think that one misconception is that people think that you have to pick like a perfect combination, right? A perfect way of how to create a top-down action roguelike game. Like these are the things that make it work, and it's not. That's not how it works. The other misconception is that like you need a ton of content. I think this is a huge barrier I see with a lot of indie teams, is that they think in terms of, well, I got to use procedural generation and I need complex systems and I have to create like Baltro level levels of like progression and complexity, and you really don't, right? Like the truth is, the largest demographic of gamers are people, I would say, our age, little bit older, like, 30 to 40 range right now. They have the most purchasing power. They also have the purchasing power for people younger, right? Like our children and whatnot. None of us have time to play games anymore, right? Like I played World of Warcraft when I was a kid because I had nothing else to do and I couldn't go outside, right? Like if you just lived in a rough area, like I just was inside all the time. That's what I did. Now I'm lucky at the end of the day if I can dedicate like 20 minutes to turning on the PlayStation to browse through what the updates were in the game to be like, man, I'm tired. I don't really know if I can do this. And then just being like, yeah, I'm not going to play anything. I'm going to go to bed. Right. So for me, the best games are the ones where I can hop in and hop out quickly. I can do my little tinkering, whatever feels good for me as a gamer. And then I'm done, right? Like I can hop onto Elden Ring, run around for a bit, try and kill a boss, and if I kill him, great, do the bonfire, and then I'm done, right? Like that fit my need to play, or Satisfactory. I know we've both been playing that recently. It's nice to just log on, run around, do some tinkering, save, and then I know that like there was progression. I didn't lose anything. The factories keep running, and I can just explore for a bit, scratch that itch, and leave. And then it's good. Like that's a good game, but that doesn't have to be complex. So I think that's the biggest misconception is that like it's got to be a great game. It's got to be a certain amount of content. It's got to be a certain kind of demo. It's not true. Like you have to have a fun experience. It's quick, easy to get in and enjoy, and then it can take any form it wants after that. But that's the key part.
How do you balance creative ambition with realistic goals?
Laying out all your cards, right, from a creative ambition standpoint. What is it that what's this big story I want to tell with all the little bells and whistles and the dongles and the chimes, and then when you have it all laid out, you're like, whoa, this is a lot more than 52 cards. Right? This is not a normal deck of cards. This is like 6 deck of cards. I should probably pull back. Well, you've already got all the creative stuff out of your system. Right? Like we already written it all down. Now you can go through it and be like, do I really need character models that like morph and change into like a different creature? Because that's like super like trendy. Like, no, I do not need that. Let's cut that. That's a huge system time of development. You could shave off like 6 months of development time, let alone polish time to make that actually look good. Right. And you just keep doing that until you have something that is more bare bones compared to your original creative idea, but it's feasible, it's achievable, right? Don't think about a giant open world level with complex destruction. I'm referencing our own monster mayhem project I'm working on. Like that'd be great. It would be awesome to just have full control of a globe and run around to all the cities in real time and like No Man's Sky it. Like that'd be amazing. But do I have the budget for that? No. Do we have the time? No. Like that's a major project. Instead, let's keep it arcade style. Like here's a small town, like run around, go nuts. Yeah, you got a star. You did it in a certain time limit. You got 2 stars. Like keep it simple, because at the end of the day, why would anybody play that kind of game is to run around as a big monster, destroying buildings, eating people. Like that's the core fun. So does it have to, does it have to be a big project? No. Can it be small? Yeah. Can it be even smaller? Totally. We could just be a street. We could turn it into a game where it's just like you run down the LA strip, just destroying everything you get to the end. And that's the end of the experience. But like, as long as it's fun, people will play it. And the key then is just to make sure the right people are playing it.
So then what about traits that make a game concept good for a new developer?
Simplicity. Keep it simple. There's supposedly this Amazon hiring question that they give you where it's like a bridge with a rope, and it tells you how long a pole is and how high the center pole is, and it asks you how far the posts are apart. Tons of engagement, tons of answers. But the simple response is you make a triangle, basic trigonometry, and you say, okay, well, here's the halfway points. If you take 10 meters, because that's from the ground to the center point of the rope, off the 50-meter pole, it's 40 meters on the one side. It's a perfect right angle, so the other angle is 45 degrees. So it's a tan 45 times 40 meters. And you multiply that on 2 because it's only half, right? Turns out to be like 130-meter distance, rounded. Like, it's not hard, but you have all these people like talking about complex systems and how the weight bends, and you have to calculate what the length of a rope is based off of the curvature and the gravity and like all this stuff, and like what's the mass of the rope. And it's, yes, those are all valid ways to figure out what the distance is between these two poles, but does it have to be that complicated? No, right? So when it comes to traits that make a good game concept, it's the same idea, is what can you achieve as simply as possible? Do you need a complex way for the character to navigate the environment where it knows where all the ledges are and it has procedural grabbing and all this kind of stuff? Like, no. Could you just make a box where it's like, hey, I touched this box, we're going to blend from our position to up on the corner, and we're just going to play this animation because we're manually telling it, hey, you're 50 meters away from the surface at this corner? The player has no idea. Like, all they see is a fluid character transition where a character jumps up and grabs a ledge and climbs up, and it feels good. And you're like, yeah, that was super responsive. That's way easier than that complicated version, right? All the like procedural and everything else, when it doesn't matter. Like, it really doesn't, unless your game is like next level Mirror's Edge style parkour that relies on that kind of stuff, which, you know, you don't need it. Don't program it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just change how you're using it. I don't know. It's the simplest way I can try and like condense that into a short answer.
From your experience working with the different prototypes and games in your past, are there any certain types of games or mechanics that you found were better suited for a beginner project, like someone who's just getting into game development?
Casual games are great, right? Not because they're simple. There's a lot of casual games out there that are like incredibly complex to code and to work with. Tiny Glade is a perfect example. Like, the way the systems are made to handle like your input as a player is really impressive, but it's complicated. That's not something a junior or an indie would be able to make who didn't have like a lot of industry experience already. So when it comes to projects that are best suited for beginners, are more like, I'm talking like hyper casual, like mobile games. Look at mobile games. They have 1, 2 inputs, a couple objectives, sometimes different game modes where it's a time trial or collect all the dots a certain amount of time, or who grows the biggest. Those are the best projects because they're simple. They're easy to replicate. And this is from a learning perspective too. I want to make sure that that's clear. These are the best ones to start with because they're so simple. You get to really understand the polished side of it, right? Like, concepting, coming up with ideas and prototypes is easy. What's hard is polishing it into something beautiful, that's fun, that's engaging, that people want to play, that people want to share, that people want to talk about. That is the real hard part. So when you do a really simple game, maybe it's just a digital joystick where your character runs around and collects things. That's, like I said, it's very easy to code that. So you can spend a lot of time learning, how do I make it look good? How do I make it feel good? A term you hear a lot, especially in the indie space, is juicy. How do I make it juicy? Like, when I collect that coin, there should be a sound, a chime. The character should like do an arm pump animation, and like a particle effect like sprays up in the air to be like, ta-da, right? Those are all things that make it feel good to just wander around a 3D map, right? But all that stuff takes time, and a good game designer is somebody who understands how to polish something into that, making it feel good. And that just takes practice. So start small, simple mechanics that you can polish up, and really understand that polishing process. Because if you really understand how long it takes to polish something simple like that, the next time you look at your own like RPG action MMO grand idea that you want to do, you're going to look at that and be like, whoa, that's like 4 years of polish to do the starting level. I'm not going to do that.
Have you ever had an idea that you've abandoned? And how did you know it was one that either wasn't the right idea or was one that it was just time to push off to the side?
That's a complicated one because, so I have 2 versions of that, right? One is where I've made a pet taking care simulator, right? So if you think like Slime Rancher, very simple. Right? I wanted to create a game like that where you just like took care of monsters. And so I built all the behavior systems for it. I built like happiness, boredom, food, water, all this kind of stuff. And only a hand of people have ever seen that prototype. But I couldn't nail down an art style that felt good, that wasn't already overused at the time. And so the only way I could make it really interesting or different was just to add more complexity, right? But if you've been listening to all my answers and everyone else's, you probably found that like that's not the way to go. It's not to make something more complicated. So that's why I dropped that project. I was like, well, it's not going to stand out as it is. So yeah, we'll just stop working on it. Now, the other one is more resource-based reasons. So I've had some really good ideas, some decent prototypes that have had interest from publishers who want it. They're like, yes, if you make that, we will fund it. But like to spend the time developing the prototype to pitch it to the developer when you have to eat and you have to pay other people, like you can't just do that for free, right? And this is the biggest barrier to developing things as a studio, is that like you can't just make it for free, because it's going to take you years to do what could probably be done with 3 months with like 2-3 people working full time, right? So I've had to abandon projects that are even now are still viable, that people are like, hey, did you ever finish that project? And it's like, no, sorry. And they're like, oh, well, why not? And it's like, well, I need at least $30K to make the prototype, but nobody will pay you to make a prototype that they can't validate until it's made. Right? Like that's not how the industry works. So you have to make this weird juggling choice where you're like, okay, well, this is obviously has a lot of potential. So it's just going to go into a folder on my drive, right? Password protected, whatever. Like this is a nugget for the future, that when I have the time, when I have the resources, I'll put more into it. And that's probably the hardest ones to let go of, because you're like, I know this would work. I know this would be fun. I know I could get the funding to build this. I just can't do it right now. On that note, if you are young and you're interested in games, even if you think you're bad at math, you're bad at art, whatever, it doesn't matter. Start now, because you have so much free time. You have no responsibilities. You don't have to deal with kids. You don't have to deal with a job. You don't have to deal with a boss. So this is a perfect time to learn. It's a perfect time to do all that tinkering, because in this time frame is when you have the time to do that, to start working on an idea that you think is great and talk to other people, validate it. Because yeah, you have time. That's the resource you have when you're young.
What role does market research, player feedback, and prototyping play into idea selection? Like this is before starting to work on the game. It's when you're looking at, I've got these 3 different ideas. What do I want to go with?
Okay, I have 2 answers. First one is, if you're doing it for fun, doesn't matter, right? If you're just tinkering, go ahead. We've talked before about how I spent a lot of time just replicating mechanics from bigger games because I wanted to know how I could do it, right? Like, how could it be done? And then they're just gone, right? It's like I have no use for them anymore. I didn't do that stuff because it was a way to make money or grow my portfolio or whatever. I did it because I enjoyed it. Same thing with developing as an indie. If it's something you're just enjoying, do it anyway, right? Just go do it. Like, who cares? And if you're posting about it and people are interested and they're hopping on board and they're asking you questions and you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll just make it Discord because I hate Facebook Messenger or something. And like, you can build a community that could one day support that project. But you have to remember that you did it for fun. That's where it should stay, is it should stay for fun. Now, on the other side, if you want to make a studio, if you want to become successful in terms of being able to continue developing games, not like I'm going to be a millionaire, but I'm going to earn enough money to continue making games, then yeah, like market research, player feedback, prototyping, they're all incredibly important, right? Like they're what you start with. Earlier, I mentioned just talking to people about an idea to see if they're like interested, that's market research, right? You don't have to like go get a million people, or sorry, not a million, like say 1,000 people or even 100 people to like fill out a form. If you could do that, kudos. But like, you don't have to do that. You just have to go out there. You have to go to talk to people, and you have to join certain groups and pitch ideas, and like, are you interested in this, and do you like this, and take that feedback. And if in short conversations with different people you see an interest, you dive a little deeper into your market analysis, your research, and you figure out, okay, well, who liked it? Why did they like it? Is this a persona? Are these all certain kinds of people that like this certain kind of game? And here's a big thing when you're doing market research. You don't have to have the mechanics working to see if it's an interesting mechanic. What I mean by that is, take a dragon. There's plenty of assets on the asset stores, right? One that has a static flying animation, and just create a simple sequence. If you're using Unreal or Unity, using their cinematic tools, just have a camera behind a dragon model that's flying and manually have it swoop down, and just have like static sheep that just move. They're not animated, and you just swoop down, pick up a couple, have them like attach, key the animation inside the dragon's mouth, and have the dragon fly away, and then just to like mix in audio of like a town bell alarm. Show that to people as a GIF, right? As a very short video. Be like, hey, what do you think of this idea? I was thinking you could like swoop down, and like, this is how the mechanic works. If people are interested, develop that mechanic and then let them test it, right? But if you show them that video and they're not excited about it, if they're not like, oh man, did you pick up cows? Oh, what about horses? But now you have actual feedback about what you should be making. That's a process for marketing, right? And getting feedback and knowing what you should do as a prototype. But if you're doing it for fun, doesn't matter. Off topic, but here's another huge misconception that I am seeing grow in sentiment, right? Like, there's this movement in the indie space to create content specifically for high profile influencers. And what I mean by that is, you can code a game to see who has logged into the game to play, like which Steam account has actively launched a game, and then you can code certain actions. Now, malicious devs sometimes use that to block streamers who do reviews from actually even opening a game. Like, they buy the game opens and says, oh, you're this streamer, game closes, because it's coded to do that. That's the most terrible way to do it. But on the flip side, there's other people who are like, oh, okay, well, if this streamer logs on and plays my game, I'm actually going to swap out the audio for like this battle scene to play the theme music from their YouTube channel. The reason that's growing is because it's like, oh, well, if I can like check, and that was just one example, but if I could see that Markiplier is playing my game or will play my game, if I put in a GIF of him somewhere and he can find it, or somebody in his audience finds it and then tells him, and he's going to go check it out because like, why did they put me in this game? And then, so you see what I mean? It's a sneaky way to market, and it's not, I shouldn't say sneaky. It's actually a clever tactic because you're trying to like force the engagement, but it really is a disservice to people, to players, to people you're genuinely trying to build the game for, because you're taking that time, that investment that should be enjoyed by a player, and you're dedicating it to an influencer that's not really going to impact the rest of the game or the rest of the players, right? That's why I think it's sneaky. I think it's like low-hanging fruit of the indie industry when it comes to marketing, versus, on par with like in-app mobile purchases followed by an ad in AAA. Like, that's the level that I think that they are at. And the misconception is that people are saying, you have to do that. If you want to succeed as an indie, you have to do stuff like this so that big streamers will share your game for free. And it's like, well, I don't know.
You don't have to, but I can also understand the appeal of it, because that's sometimes all it takes for an indie game to explode.
Totally.
A group of 4 streamer friends get together and play it. They happen to be bigger streamers, and now suddenly everybody wants the game. Hello Among Us.
No, perfect example, right? But personal views and ethics, I guess. But I think that the misconception is that you need to do that in order for your game to be successful. I don't think that's true, because I think the bigger focus should be on, is it simple and fun to play? Because if it is, you can keep farming it out. Eventually somebody will play it. Eventually somebody will get it out there. I mean, Angry Birds was a dead game on the App Store for years before a big streamer found it and was like, ha, I'm going to make a video. And then it blew up, right? Like, the guy was totally, he was like, I haven't touched this in years. And then, that's off a different story for a different time. But, like, if it's decent, fun, and engaging, you just got to keep farming it out.
Well, I think that's everything I needed.
Cool.
Anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody is listening and they're into monster destruction games and they like the idea of running around as a big Sasquatch or something destroying a city, reach out. You reach out on James DK Smith on LinkedIn, or even join the Indie Innovators Discord. I am regularly in there, and I can talk about the game.
I'd have to say that the message of this week's episode is that successful indie game development isn't as simple as one answer. It involves picking the right idea, validating it with real interest. There's also keeping scope realistic. And just because we like an idea, it doesn't mean that it's going to succeed. It would suck to find out that testing early could have saved a lot of time and investment into aspects of a game that just don't resonate with the target audience. But also keep in mind with what James said. If you're making a game for fun, just go wild. And if you're coming into this to make it a career, then it might be a good idea to approach it with a strategy.